give me the keys to the G Wagon.
I'll hand you the keys to the G Wagon.
And you will remember to like and subscribe.
Liking and subscribing.
Hey guys, welcome back to Remove Before Race, and a big welcome to all our new subscribers and followers. Now guys, in recent videos we've been looking at the history of some of the other automakers before we do the main review. But despite my namesake as Mr AMG, we've never actually delved into what is arguably the richest history of all the automotive industry, that of the three-pointed star. And no story is more rich, perhaps, than that of the Gelandewagen itself. But you see, we can't attend to that yet because this wasn't actually the first 4x4 that Mercedes ever made. You see, the first one is actually this, and it was called the Dernberg Wagen. You see, Mercedes were building cars before their rivals were even a wet dream in their founder's pants. And this was built in 1907, and it was requested by a man of the same name, who was the Secretary of State of a colonial office in Africa. And it was made essentially to traverse rough terrain and unmade roads. And it was engineered, in fact, by Gottlieb Daimler's own son. And this had all-wheel drive. It even had rear wheel or all-wheel steering, rather. So it was well ahead of its time and before any of the other manufacturers had done it. But of course, this was just the all-wheel drive origin for Mercedes-Benz. The true first SUV was suggested by the Shah of Iran back in the 1970s, that Mercedes should make one, and he was quite a big shareholder of Mercedes at the time. So then Mercedes got together with Austrian companies, Steyr and Puch, and together they started the Haflinger 2 project. And it began in Austria, in Graz, in the exact same factory that the G Wagon is actually still built today. So the car eventually launched in 1979 under the designation GE model. And it came in 3 to 4 different variants. So we had the classic wagon look, we had the shorter wheelbase with 2 doors, a soft top shorter wheelbase as well. There was a version with no windows. And the car was even modified to win the Dakar Rally, which was a famous and infamous part of G Wagon history. And of course, the first car also sat on a ladder chassis, as the current one does today, had 3 locking differentials as well. And it came in a host of petrol and diesel engines. And it's this setup that allowed it to conquer the terrain so well. And it became infamous for this. And because of this, it's today now been used by over 63 armies. Heck, there was even a Peugeot variant called the P4. And not only that, I mean, even the Pope had a Pope-mobile version of it. I mean, it became really popular. The first interior, which we will get onto later because it's very key for the new car, was very rugged, but it's got a certain charm to it when you look back at it even now. So we had a kind of a mild refresh in the 80s, which brought along the automatic box, electric windows, anti-lock brakes, slightly better interior. But as you'll notice, there's a trend with most G-Wagon updates. It's all underneath the skin. It maintains the same look while improving the usability and the experience of the car. So on the 10th anniversary of the G, it got another update, this time with 3 electric locking differentials, making it even better on the road and off it. And it was around about this time that customers started to realize that the G-Wagon was getting a bit slow. So Mercedes offered its first ever V8 G-Wagon, which was the 500 GE, soon to be renamed G500, as all the Mercedes were at that time. This removed the front differential and replaced it with more leather and luxury. And it was for a customer that Mercedes was starting to become a little bit more aware of. Now, you think they would have taken the hint from the grey market in the USA, where G-Wagons were being imported for over a decade now, just to be modified and sold to customers, not for off-road use necessarily, but for luxury. And they were being sold for 6-figure sums, almost double what they were in Europe. But you see, that wasn't enough. The hunger for a more powerful G-Wagon was growing amongst the Mercedes customer base. So what did MB do in 2002? They handed the G-Wagon over to AMG to work their magic on it. And the first son of an iconic range was born, the G53 AMG. This came with a 5.5 litre naturally aspirated engine with 349 brake horsepower and a 0 to 60 of just under 7 seconds. And don't knock it, this was quite impressive in the noughties, kids. And the G55 was a veritable hit worldwide. So development continued on this car. It became more and more powerful as AMG continued to adjust both the ride and put bigger and bigger power into the engine. But the one that concerns us the most for this review is the one previous to the new car, which was the first generation of 463 AMG Gs, and that is the G63 AMG, later renamed to the AMG G63. Now this was a big change in 2012 from the original G Wagon. It was probably the biggest ever at this point, and it came with a massively updated interior compared to what we had before. It even had the AMG screens, the whole proper command system, Linguatronic, a much plusher front dashboard. And of course, outside it changed a lot as well. It finally got an AMG specific grille with the twin bar grille. It got a more aggressive front bumper, LED lights. It came with the 7-speed gearbox as opposed to the 5-speed that the G55 had. But despite all of that, it still had recirculating ball for the steering, which is ancient technology, and the front axle was still fixed. So essentially, it still handled like a drunk elephant. It had the 5.5 litre bi-turbo, which replaced the 6.2 legendary engine from the previous AMGs. And this was a powerful engine with 563 brake horsepower, and it rocketed the car from 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds, which is no mean feat. You add that to a car with vague steering, and it became a very interesting ride. Let's just put it that way. So, I mean, I even had a 463 edition myself, and I must say, I've never been so depressed to discover what a car drives like in my entire life. It was actually really quite frightening. Now, don't get me wrong, I did fall in love with the classic nature of the G, certain elements about it, which I'll discuss later. But it's in the exact same way that you would fall in love with driving any old car. None of the bits I loved had anything to do with the AMG formula of the car. And of course, you had other variants of that particular 463 range. There was a G65, which was much of the same, if not more boring, because it lacked the sound. And then, of course, we had other big variants as well, all sorts, like the 4 squared, the 6x6. Heck, there was even that weird Maybach. So with a price close to that of an AMG GTS, you're ending up with a car that had horrible lag, no real discernible AMG noise, a cabin about as big as an A-Class, and handling of like a smart car. It wasn't really an attractive looking car, certainly not to me anyway. So the G just had to change. And we got a hint of this when Mercedes showed the concept G-Force, which was them kind of nodding and saying, yeah, we're looking at the G, it's not going to be left behind. So a lot of people worried that this is what the final G would look like. Luckily, that wasn't the case. And rather than Mercedes handle the development of the G themselves, instead, they handed the entire project over to AMG. Now, this should tell you how serious they were about getting the driving dynamics right. And it wasn't just for the G63, it's for the standard G as well. Because under Tobias Moores, the CEO, AMGs have to have some decent level of driving performance. So he wasn't going to let a car have an AMG badge unless it deserved it. So during the time that that first G63 was released, AMG got to work on the next gen. The goal was threefold: to maintain the off-roading capability of the G, along with that classic G character, but allowing an AMG badge to display without embarrassment, so it had to have some AMG about it. And those lunatics had some great ideas, right? So first of all, they got rid of that ancient steering system, and instead we got rack and pinion variable ratio. So now we're actually going to get some steering wheel feel from the steering. And we can also get tech like lane keeping and self-parking and self-driving. So that's a massive boon straight off the bat. But then we can't keep the fixed front axle with that steering either. So that has left the car now, and now we get a double wishbone suspension. So we can actually begin to consider cornering now. Plus the car then went on a massive diet. And with extended use of aluminium, the car shaves off about 170 kg. I mean, that's like chucking a baby elephant out of the car. Suddenly, this is looking more and more interesting. But then, of course, the AMG flavor had to be added to the car as well. So we no longer have the 7-speed, now we got the 9-speed box out of the latest AMGs. And of course, betraying the power behind the bonnet is the Panamericana grille, behind which sits no longer the 5.5 litre with its laggy engine response. Now sits the hot V setup 4-litre V8 out of the E63 Hammer, in this car producing 577 brake horsepower, a 0 to 60 of 4.5 seconds, and 850 Newton meters of torque. These are some seriously impressive figures. If we go back to the original G55, which had 349 brake and a 0 to 60 of around 7 seconds, this car still looks the same. And this is how far we've come along now. Heck, you even compare that 0 to 60 to the C63 6.2 litre that we all love and pine after, it's the same figure. Now, of course, I mentioned the Panamericana grille, and you might be forgiven for thinking that and the lights are the only thing that's changed. But that's only at first glance. When you actually look at this car and you read the specs about it, the entire body has changed. It is genuinely a whole new G. So first of all, the width of it is the first thing that strikes everyone. It is grown by 3 inches, and it is a very, very noticeable 3 inches. So you can really see the extended wheel arches, the larger body of the car, a much more AMG stance thanks to the 22-inch wheels and the wider tires. It's also grown in length by 2 inches as well, meaning inside we're going to get a roomier cabin, which is great. The whole look of the front end is very powerful. I disagree with the people on the lights. I think they look absolutely fine. This is the classic G Wagon light shape. I do think the bottom part is a bit soft. It looks better with the bull bars. These aren't legal in the UK and Europe, unfortunately. But I actually get why it looks this way as well, because this is not trying to be like all the other AMGs of this current generation. It's trying to meld the G character and some of the modern AMG character in one. And I'll discuss more of that later, and I'll qualify that for you. But I want to compare it to the previous G and just show you all the main panels of the car, and then you begin to realize that this has genuinely been changed in every single discernible area. It truly is a completely new car. Now, one very interesting part of the design is what I think is Mercedes' geometrical shape for SUV design, and it's like a rounded square. You'll see it replicated all over this car. It seems to be the G Wagon shape. I absolutely love the rear. It looks so nice and rounded. I love the lights, which still look very G Wagon, but are very modern. But one bit I absolutely hate about the rear is that tow bar, which is fixed. It doesn't retract at all. I mean, when you've done so many changes to the car, why couldn't we have a retractable tow bar? I mean, it just looks like a, well, you know what it looks like. I'm not going to say it. Thankfully, though, your attention is taken by the spare wheel on the back, which I'm so happy that they maintain, because it's such a G Wagon trait, isn't it? In terms of design, this particular car is, of course, the Edition 1. So it's got red details around the wheels, on the wing mirror. There's a AMG Motorsport stripe on the side and a unique interior that we'll look at later. And you get Magna Night black finish, which is a glorious satin black. Interesting. Now, this is the first of the second generation, the G63. This is the only one at the moment coming to the UK. You also got the G500 in the rest of the world. But I find it odd that this car comes with 577 brake, when we know that the top tune of this engine gets at least up to 612 or even higher in the GT63, which makes me think that there is room for a G63S. Certainly, this is only the first hurrah. The car is now more dynamic. It can be made more dynamic. So I think that would be really interesting. Can AMG make it even more dynamic? Now, of course, the 65 series is dead. The V12s will no longer be made at Mercedes, but something even more powerful and perhaps a lot more useful is being considered. You guys might remember the GT 4-door concept, where they previewed a system which linked EQ hybrid power to proper AMG power. And allegedly a 73 series of AMGs will be coming, which will pair that 4-litre V8 to electric motors and EQ power and produce horsepower close to 800 brake. Now that could be really interesting, couldn't it? We've had a look at the design outside, and despite the changes to the technology and to the look of the car, the biggest change and one of the best changes in terms of design comes inside. So guys, the first thing about the G Wagon interior that you must understand is a part of G character that was maintained by Mercedes AMG that all the G customers, including myself, loved. It was a tiny thing, but it was really important, and it was this. that ka-chunk of the door, and then when you lock it again, there was a distinct G-Class character when you lock the car. And it's that locking sound, the ka-chunk of the mechanical locks that has been maintained, and the way that the door shut. And that was really important to us because it was always in the G Wagon. So it's great that that's been maintained in here. The offshoot of that is you don't get like keyless entry, etc. in this car, but it's a good enough trade-off in my opinion. So as I was saying, the inside of this car is really special, and it's not just special for the sake of being modern. It's special because for the first time ever to me, you've actually got character of G Wagon on the inside of the car. But I think for you to really appreciate this interior, I want to compare it directly to the previous G63, that is the outgoing one now. So let's start first of all with the main view. And you can see what a massive improvement this is. It's just brought the G interior to the next level. It's in line with the top of the range S-Class, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. You'll also notice in the old G Wagon interior, the absolute worst part was the driver zone, where you didn't even get an AMG steering wheel in it. You got the standard style one. Now you get the S63 style steering wheel, which is in every single AMG up to the GT63S. And then behind that, of course, you see the new driver zone with the twin 12-inch displays straight out of the S-Class. But it doesn't end there, and I want you to keep an eye out for that geometrical shape that I mentioned to you, which was the rounded square, because you'll see that everywhere, and it is the signature off-roading and G Wagon shape. So if I show you the door cards from the old car, both in the front and the rear, you can see the massive improvements while maintaining the classic structure of the door card from the original G Wagon, especially this particular grab handle here and the squareness at the top of the window ledge here. So all of that character has been maintained while making it look absolutely fantastic. You even look at how the Burmester speaker and my favorite bit, the door handle here, which almost looks like a G logo to me with that rounded square, has been redesigned. Then it links to the gorgeous carbon fiber on the side. The whole thing is just to die for. It's so wonderfully done. Then you'll notice in the front, of course, that classic G Wagon handle has been maintained, and that has been here since the very first G. Even the center console, the sides of it, look how sparse and boring the previous one was. And now look at how they've updated it in this one. And I just want to show you a few areas around the car where you will see the massive difference compared to the previous car. It is undeniable how much better this car now is inside. And there's little details like the Burmester speaker up here at the top. Now this looks like an interior that you will spend 150-odd thousand pounds on and feel like you spent your money well. But then a lot of people immediately complain, well, this is not G Wagon, this is too modern and you've ruined it, etc. I guarantee you, none of those people have seen the original G Wagon interior. So let me show you what that looks like. Now all of a sudden, when you look at the structure of the old one, it's been mimicked exactly in this modern one. From especially that center console area where the center console part, the bit under the vents, the vent section itself, are in all exactly the same shape as the original G. You even look at the side vents on each side of the interior, they're the same round shape as is being used now. And then you've of course got the classic grab handle. But it goes beyond that. The reason I said it's more G in here than ever before, you look at the shape of the vents and they'll look familiar to you because they're done in the same shape as the exterior front headlights. So you've got that look now on the inside, which is signature G Wagon. No other Mercedes has them. And then it doesn't stop there. You look at the Burmester tweeters on top of the dashboard, they're in the same shape and positioning that the outside indicators of the car are. Again, bringing the outside of the car in. It's been done in such a clever way. It's only when you sit down and appreciate the previous original G and you look at this one do you realize just how far Mercedes have taken the G character. I recently sat in the new GLE, as you guys saw in my walk around from Paris back to my house, transporting the car here. And that interior was great, but it was not on the level of this G Wagon interior. And that was never the case before. You look at the old car and it wasn't a great place to sit in. This now sits right at the top as the most luxurious SUV interior that Mercedes has. And that's where the G Wagon should have always been. Some other bits that we need to talk about as well. So you've got the classic locking differential controls exactly where they've always been. So it's nice that they've kept that here and they've kept that analog, but it still does look modern. Gone is having the gear controls here and the handbrake. That's removed now. It's a very nice and simple design with the touchpad controller. Disappointed to see the old touchpad here. Would have liked to have seen the flat touch one, which has really been done really well. And then you see my favorite button there, the exhaust button, and we'll get onto that very shortly. I want you to hear this car. Then you come up here and you see we've got the IWC watch, just like in the other top AMGs, which is absolutely key for me because I love the partnership between IWC and AMG. You'll notice we've got carbon in this particular car. This is of course the Edition 1, as we said, and this interior is specific to the Edition 1. So you get what they call red pepper and black carbon fiber. And although I wasn't a huge fan of the wheels outside, this interior kind of sold it for me. But one thing I was very disappointed about is that you could only get the steering wheel in what I call A220 stitching, which is the perforated leather. I don't know why they've started doing that in Editions. This should have surely had a carbon fiber steering wheel with the Dynamica, with the red pepper and black carbon fiber. That would have made so much sense. And then whereas in most editions they write Edition here with the AMG logo, they haven't even bothered with that. It's a strange one and it annoys me because I do not like full leather steering wheels, as you guys know. And look, you've got Dynamica absolutely everywhere in the headlining. It's gorgeous, it looks great, but this just kind of lets it down. Now having this full screen command system in the G, again, it's a massive, massive improvement for G owners. Plus it brings the car pretty much up to date. Yes, it's still behind the A-Class. This is not MBUX, very unfortunately. I'm sure it will come in eventually. It would be great to have the GLE's version, the most up-to-date one in here, but we haven't got that at the moment. But you've got all the stuff like we saw in the S63 review, so I'm not going to go too much into this, but just to highlight some of the coolest bits. So these seats are absolutely awesome. They're so much better than the older ones. The bolsters are really quite large, as you'd expect in AMGs. Plus you pair that with the dynamic seat option I have on this, where the seat moves while you're cornering. It's a hell of an experience. And that means, of course, that we've got massaging seats as well, lumbar. You can set all of the side bolsters and have the seat exactly as you want it, which is really, really cool. Then, of course, my favorite bit, you have got the full ambient lighting options of 64 different colors, multicolor ambient lighting. So I'll switch that on now and you will see that change to the red moon one. In terms of the AMG-ness of this now, if that is even a word, now of course you've got the dynamic select option, so you will go in there and you've got everything like you've got in the E63. You can set the I mode where you can configure drive, transmission, suspension, the exhaust flaps open or closed, and ESP, and save that as your setting. And of course in terms of the AMG options, we've got the full driving modes as well. So it goes all the way from the newest one, which is slippery, which is of course important in the G, to individual, comfort, sport and sport plus, but there's no race mode in this. And again, it's making me think there's room here for the G63 S model. Then of course the driver zone, which is the most important part as far as I'm concerned. It's brilliant because now you've got this really good seating position where you're lower than the other G Wagon, but you're still high up as you'd expect to be in a G, and you've got the more comfortable seats. And of course you've got the new steering wheel with the touch button, so left one controls left screen, right one controls right. And because this is digital, we get a choice of screens now. We've got Sport, Classic, as you'd have in normal Mercedes cars, and Progressive, which is quite similar to Sport. My favorite is Sport because it's very AMG specific. The other part, which is not new to G, but it's quite important, is you now get Apple CarPlay once you plug your iPhone in. So that, of course, gives you now, in the update to Apple CarPlay, access to Google Maps and Waze, or Waz, or whatever it's called, which is a game changer, because before, to me, Apple CarPlay was a bit of a gimmick, not really useful. But I tend not to rely on car navigations and prefer using those apps. And now you can get it within the screen here, which is making that something that we will really miss in cars that don't have CarPlay now, in my opinion. Now in the back, the rear seat passengers who are used to G Wagon are going to be so happy because it's a transformed interior in the back in terms of comfort. Now the seats lean back a little bit more, you've got so much more room, but mainly it's about the comfort when you're actually sitting in here. You can actually viably sit down in the back and enjoy the drive rather than be flung around like you were in the old G Wagon. It was a really unpleasant experience. Again, someone who buys this is most likely going to have family or friends, and it wasn't a pleasant experience previously for them to sit in here. Now it's really, really nice inside. Right, but as with all performance cars, you know what's coming now. It's time to look at the sound. But before I show you this car's sound, I want to show you what the old G Wagon sounded like. Now that wasn't impressive at all. In terms of sound, to me, it sounded more like a tractor, and that's what I always say about the G, and you're going to hear that a lot in this review. But this car is different. Unlike the previous one, which had no pops and bangs or overruns or any kind of interesting sound profile at all, this one sounds really quite good. So let's give it a start up now in Sports Plus. Now it's still got some of that G character, but it sounds louder and more exciting. So I'm going to chuck it now into comfort with the flaps open, mind you, and give you some revs. Now that sounds pretty normal. If anything, it sounds a little bit like the old one. But when you chuck it into Sport Plus, as you can see, that's got a bit of that old G Wagon sound, but mixed with a lot of the new AMG sound. It's got the overruns, it's got little pops and bangs. So I feel like AMG have kind of taken that modern AMG sound, mixed it with what you had with the previous G, and now there's this unique G Wagon symphony, but we'll have to see whether that's the same on the road. I know the answer to that, but I really want you guys to hear it yourselves. But as you can hear, it's not as loud as you might be used to from the cars that we've reviewed recently in the modern AMGs. And I wanted to remind you of what those sound like. And to do that, I want to call the AMG Hulk. I can't wait to show you what this next generation of G Wagon designed by AMG is like on the road. So to appreciate the new G, I have to impart to you how abysmal this old one was. And it can pretty much be summarized by the steering alone, where you have to give it lock and lock and lock and lock. And then eventually the car steers, and then you've got this massive dead zone in the middle where you're not sure where the wheels are or where the front end is going. And when the car is linked to an engine with almost 600 horsepower to it, that's not really great, is it? So you have to kind of plan your steering. And it only compounds when you increase speed, because it's not a variable rack. So it gets worse the faster you get. Oh, geez. So you have to kind of plan your steering in this car. And then it doesn't end there, because the laggy response of this 5.5 litre in this particular car was enough that you could go and make a cup of tea. I mean, I could literally put the foot down, nothing. And then 3 seconds later, the car wakes up. And look how much lock I'm having to give it. Then there's the dead zones. So you've got to plan your steering, and you got to plan your throttle input about a week in advance to make sure the car picks up speed, or you got to make sure it doesn't pick up too much speed at the wrong time. But it's just not that, is it? Because, oh yeah, the brakes don't work all that well either. So you have to plan your steering, plan your throttle, and plan your braking in a car that weighs over 2.5 tons and almost 600 brake. It sounds tiresome, and it is absolutely tiresome. And then it's not like you get the benefit of an AMG sound either. The car just sounds like a tractor. It hasn't got the same V8 noise that the other 5.5 litres of this era had. So what AMG benefit do you derive? You don't get sound, you don't get any sort of handling experience. All you get is a badge on the back and a body kit. The only thing that really saved it was the fact that it was a G Wagon and a classic, but that's not enough really, not for most of us. So as I said, the G had to change, and thank God it has. I often say it only takes 100 yards or so to find out whether you like a new car and the way it behaves, and I'd say it's even less with the new G. Whenever anyone's asked me what I think of the car in terms of its handling, I've always said one thing: it does this amazing thing where you turn the steering wheel and the car turns as well. I mean, hallelujah, this is revolutionary in a G. And then listen to the sound, I'll come on to that. But if you try to mimic the old motions of the previous G Wagon, I guarantee you'll do a 180. Oh, thank you so much AMG for sorting the steering out. It's just transformed the car completely. No longer does one have to keep the will and testament completely up to date before considering to go on a drive. You've actually got real feedback now as to where the wheels are, and now everything is speed sensitive, so when I'm going faster, the steering is stiffening. But when we do slower maneuvers around town or smaller corners, it's a little bit lighter and gives you that flexibility. Essentially what I'm trying to say, a small input will give you a small output. Now I know that sounds very basic, but this is a major luxury for anyone who's ever driven a G Wagon before. Now I feel we can drive a bit faster. I've actually got confidence in a G Wagon for the first time. So let's push this car on a little bit. Now it's really interesting, that new steering rack plus the double wishbone suspension has given this such a fun drive. Not only do you no longer cower at the sight of a corner, dare I say you actually kind of welcome it as well. Just to see how this 2 meter tall car can actually handle like this. This is the first time I've driven the G Wagon and felt that yes, AMG have had a major hand in the dynamics. Before, it was just, dare I say, lipstick on a pig. Now don't get me wrong, it's no G63 or Lamborghini Urus, the last cars that we tested here. But it gives you driving pleasure as well as being able to tackle mountains. That is the magic of this new G. And then the side bolsters, they hug you just like in an S63. It's a brilliant combination. All in all, you end up with actual driving pleasure. No longer do you dread driving it fast. You kind of think, hell, I wouldn't mind going on some A and B roads. And that's revolutionary in G-Class. I cannot stress that enough, to have driving pleasure. And speaking of pleasure, I think we need to talk about sound. Listen to that animal. This is in Sport Plus, the valves are open, and it just sounds a proper AMG now. Gone is that horrible tractor noise. This has got more than a hint of what we had in the S63 and the E63, which of course is not surprising given the engine tune, but it's also kind of got its own sound. It doesn't quite pop and bang and have the overruns of the E63 or the GLC 63 as you saw in those videos, but I don't know, it actually does remind me a little bit in the way the sound profile is to the old G Wagon, but it sounds like an AMG version, which is what it always should have sounded. It's absolutely addictive, and boy is this thing fast. Now AMG probably could have made it sound exactly like the GLC 63 or the E63, but I think they consciously haven't done that. I think it's that idea I was talking about earlier of melding G character with AMG character together and creating what is a unique sound profile for a unique car. This doesn't sound or handle or drive like any other car, or indeed look like any other car in the AMG lineup. And then you come on to speed. Oh, the way this thing picks up speed. It's nothing like the car that we saw previously. You saw the lag in the 5.5, or rather you probably heard the lag. It's not like that. This is the hot V setup like the E63, like the AMG GT, same engine, producing 577. And when you request power in this car, it's immediately available. There's no delay. It's so addictive to pick up speed in this car. And that's why I'm kind of struggling to get double digits in the MPG, because you just want to put your foot down and hear that all the time. And just marvel at how this 2 meter tall car can pick up speed the way it does. It's really magical. That is fast. How much fun is that? And you never would have considered doing that in the previous G. A, because of that steering dead zone. B, because the lag would have been too long and you would have gone into next week. But then of course, braking, you would want to have braked nicely at the end, which this car, it works perfectly. So suddenly those 3 factors that hindered any kind of performance driving in the previous car, now there's something that you want to dip into and want to experience in this car. It's a whole new level. It's an AMG level. So I'm of course a fan of the performance, but if we knock it now back into comfort with the exhaust on or else guys, then it's just a sedate, luxurious Mercedes-Benz with a nice V8 rumble when you call for it. You'll also notice something that I would never do in the previous G, which is driving the car with one hand, because that's how good the steering is. Then you have smaller maneuvers like parking in and out of town, etc. All can be done so easily in this car. It's got a better turning circle. You've got 360 camera, which is an absolute godsend in a car of this size and width. Can we please have that in the AMG GT family, please? Mercedes AMG, please. Would be really good. And you can just chug miles and miles and miles on this thing, and you almost start believing you're in an S63 until you look at that miles per gallon, which I am not going to do, and then you come back to reality, and yes, you are absolutely in a G Wagon. I just want to drive this in a way that the car doesn't save on fuel consumption. And can you really blame me when it sounds so brilliant? The G Wagon finally has a true sequel. It's no longer firefighting from the past. Rather, this is a whole new model, and it's been built by AMG to have driving dynamics that are genuinely fun. And it's got such a strong G character that perhaps no other G has had before. I think it's the most G Wagon, especially with regards to that iconic design being refined. It no longer looks scrawny on the road thanks to the bigger width, and now the interior mimics not only the first G Wagon, but mimics the exterior inside. Already a legendary off-roader, apparently the off-roading ability has been even further improved in this car. Hopefully we will get to test that in a more exciting way one day. You really frustrate me, modern day AMG. Can't you just get a car wrong for once that you get your hands on? I was happily singling the G out as the black sheep of the AMG family, the one to say, yep, it drives and sounds and feels like crap. But now you've taken it and you've turned it into a proper AMG with G character. I guess I'll have to turn to the SL and the SLC to pick on, but if rumors are to be believed rather, you guys have got your claws into that off Mercedes just like this car, and development has started on AMG based versions of those cars. So given the success of this project, all of us are going to be waiting with a lot of anticipation to see what you guys do with that. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this review of what is the true G Wagon sequel. I've absolutely had a blast in it. Finally, AMG have turned me over to actually liking this car after having bought it rather than being completely depressed. And it is a car that you guys must absolutely drive if you get a chance to, because unlike a lot of cars that we drive and test these days where they're only 10 and 20% different from each other, you know, you'll drive an SVR and a GLE63, or you will drive an M3 and a C63, and there's certain differences. The G Wagon is totally different to everything in the way that it handles, in the way that it sounds, in the way that it looks, and the way that it goes about all of its business, and that's what makes it a true winner now. So guys, as you always do, please like and subscribe. Don't make me use my Jedi mind trick. And as I always do, I'm going to try and get into single-digit MPG with this car now. So I'll see you next time.